Supreme Court allows Trump to continue White House ballroom construction for now. Reuters, CNBC, PBS, and the New York Times all frame the order as temporary because the justices left the underlying challenge unresolved. The record says Chief Justice John Roberts permitted work connected to the $400 million project to proceed while lower court paperwork continues. That matters because the East Wing demolition has already changed the White House grounds, so a later ruling would arrive after visible construction momentum. The dispute is less about interior design than about who can stop federal building decisions before they become irreversible facts on the ground. The practical question is whether opponents can show a legal injury strong enough to slow an executive project at the president's own workplace, before demolition and site work make remedies harder. The sources also separate the emergency order from a final merits decision, which keeps both sides from claiming the case is over and leaves accountability questions open. Contractors, preservation groups, and congressional overseers will read the next filing for any limits on timing, spending records, appropriations treatment, historic preservation review, security access, emergency logistics, contract authority, or public access today. Watch for a fuller court order, a new lower court schedule, or White House construction disclosures that narrow what can happen next. U.S. Postal Service shares mail-in ballot restrictions despite court ruling. Reuters, Al Jazeera, The Hill, and the New York Times describe a final order-style move that would tighten requirements for ballot mail while litigation continues. The conflict is important because election mail depends on predictable postmarking, acceptance rules, and deadlines that voters may not discover until late in the cycle. Court fights over those rules can leave local election offices trying to explain one set of instructions while another is being appealed. The Postal Service record, as described by the sources, points toward more restrictive handling if courts ultimately allow it. That means the immediate stakes are operational, not theoretical. Ballot envelopes, voter notices, county processing plans, and legal deadlines all have to line up. Civil rights groups and state officials will likely focus on whether the agency can change voting-related mail standards after judges have questioned similar restrictions. The story also tests how much authority a service agency has when its rules affect access to the franchise, especially when ballots move through a national logistics network. Voters need clear, early guidance because a late rule change can turn a mailing mistake into a rejected vote. Watch for the next docket entry, any stay request, and state election guidance telling voters which mail-in deadlines actually control. Trump to allow import of 300,000 metric tons of ground beef without tariff. Reuters, CNBC, The New York Times, The Hill, and CBS describe the move as a temporary tariff waiver aimed at easing consumer beef prices. The supporting record says beef prices have climbed in 2026 as the national cattle herd has shrunk, leaving grocery shoppers exposed to tighter supply. The political tension is that cheaper imports can help families at the meat case while angering domestic ranchers who benefit from higher cattle prices. The volume matters because 300,000 metric tons is large enough to signal a real supply intervention, not just symbolic trade language. It also puts the administration between two constituencies. Households demanding relief and producers worried about foreign competition. Markets will watch whether retailers pass any savings through, because tariff relief does not automatically become lower shelf prices. Trade partners will read the waiver as a test of whether food inflation can override protectionist instincts. The cattle industry will ask whether temporary import relief becomes recurring policy if prices remain high. Consumers will judge the decision by supermarket receipts, not announcement language. The next useful evidence is customs guidance, import timing, cattle price reaction, and statements from producer groups. Watch for whether the measure is extended, challenged, or paired with other food price actions. Tesla recalls 3 million vehicles in China over doorhandle safety, driver monitoring. Reuters, CNBC, The Guardian, and Bloomberg identify the action as part of a record vehicle recall wave in China, with Tesla addressing doorhandle risks and driver monitoring problems. The scale is the key fact. About 3 million vehicles means the fix affects a major portion of the company's China fleet and cannot be handled as a narrow service bulletin. Doorhandle failures carry a safety dimension because exits matter during crashes, power loss, or fire response. Driver monitoring defects matter for a different reason, because assistance systems rely on knowing whether a human is ready to retake control. Chinese regulators have been increasingly direct about electric vehicle safety, so Tesla's remedy will be judged by compliance paperwork and owner execution rather than the headline alone. Investors will watch cost, repair timing, and whether the issue hurts Tesla's brand in a market where local EV makers are already aggressive. Owners will need clear instructions on appointment scheduling, software updates, or parts replacement. Dealers and service centers also need parts, staffing, and software tools before a large recall becomes a real fix now. The broader signal is that scale can turn a technical defect into a regulatory and reputation problem. Watch for regulator notices, Tesla's repair plan, and completion rate disclosures. Attacked by Trump on trade, Canada is at war with US, Carney says. The New York Times, Politico, PBS, and the Financial Times describe Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney using unusually sharp language as the trade fight with Washington escalates. The quoted phrase matters because it turns a tariff dispute into a test of national economic strategy and diplomatic restraint. PBS separately notes that 50% tariffs on Canadian goods had just gone into effect, giving the rhetoric a concrete policy backdrop. For Canada, the risk is that exporters face sudden cost changes while provincial leaders and affected industries demand retaliation or relief. For the United States, the risk is that pressure on a close ally spills into supply chains, border politics, and consumer prices. Carney's language also signals that Ottawa may treat the dispute as a long campaign rather than a single negotiating round. Markets will look past the insult and ask which products, exemptions, and enforcement dates actually change. Diplomats will watch whether both governments keep talks open while playing to domestic audiences. Businesses on both sides of the border need to know whether contracts signed under old tariff assumptions still make sense. The next useful record is customs guidance, retaliatory lists, minister-level meetings, and any revised tariff text that shows whether the conflict is narrowing or broadening. Trump's visa ban on 75 countries struck down by federal judge. The Washington Post, AP News, The Hill, and Fox News report that a federal judge vacated a policy suspending immigrant visa processing for applicants from 75 countries. AP News's framing is especially important because vacating the policy suggests more than a narrow pause. It points to the rule being set aside unless a higher court intervenes. The case affects families, employers, and consular officers who need to know whether visa evaluations restart under normal procedures. It also places Secretary of State Marco Rubio's department under judicial scrutiny, with Fox News describing the judge's criticism of the freeze as Orwellian. The legal stakes reach beyond the named countries because the ruling tests how much discretion the executive branch has to halt visa processing in bulk. Applicants will still face individual screening, but the decision challenges a categorical barrier that had stopped cases at the front door. The administration can seek a stay, rewrite the policy, or appeal, and each path changes the timetable for consulates. The Hill's account adds that the ruling is already being read as a broader rebuke to blanket immigration restrictions. Immigration lawyers will watch for instructions sent to posts overseas. The next concrete signs are a Justice Department filing, updated State Department guidance, and evidence that interviews resume. Alfalfa sprouts recalled after E. coli, salmonella outbreak sickens dozens in 15 states. CBS News, The New York Times, The Hill, USA Today, and CDC-linked reporting tie the illnesses to alfalfa sprouts and describe a multi-state food safety investigation. The most specific public risk figure in the source cluster is 55 illnesses connected to salmonella and E. coli exposure. That matters because two pathogens can complicate testing, tracing, and public advice for people who bought or ate the product. Sprouts are a familiar outbreak vehicle because warm, moist growing conditions can also support bacterial growth if contamination enters seeds or production lines. The recall gives consumers an immediate action: check packages, discard affected products, and clean surfaces that touch them. For grocers and restaurants, the burden is inventory control and customer notification before more servings go out. Investigators will use purchase records, supplier links, and lab fingerprints to decide whether the outbreak is still expanding. The story is not just about one garnish, it is about how quickly a perishable product can move through many states. Vulnerable people also need faster warnings because dehydration and complications can follow gastrointestinal infection after exposure and delayed medical care. Watch for CDC case count updates, FDA traceback findings, company lot numbers, and any notice that the recalled sprouts are off shelves. Russia and Ukraine trade attacks that kill at least 10 after deadly mall drone strike. CBS News, Al Jazeera, NBC News, and ABC News and headlines. Australian Broadcasting Corporation describe another round of reciprocal strikes following a deadly attack on a shopping mall. The confirmed public fact is that at least 10 people were killed across the reported attacks, while both sides continue to frame their actions through military necessity and retaliation. The sequence matters because civilian locations and cross-border infrastructure keep turning battlefield pressure into wider public risk. Al Jazeera reports Putin warning about destructive hits, which signals that Moscow is still using escalation language even as diplomatic openings are discussed elsewhere. Ukraine will read the strikes through air defense needs, emergency response capacity, and requests for faster allied support. Russia will watch whether Ukrainian long-range attacks change domestic perceptions of the war's cost. For outside governments, the question is whether new deaths harden positions before any negotiation track can gain traction. Casualty totals may move as rescue teams and local officials update damage reports, NBC News' account keeps the focus on the human toll after the mall strike, while CBS News anchors the wider attack exchange. The next concrete evidence is municipal casualty lists, military statements, satellite or geolocated damage review, and allied announcements on air defense funding or weapons deliveries. Live updates, latest from Israel, Iran, and the Middle East. AP News, The Guardian, and ABC News and Headlines, Australian Broadcasting Corporation report that Iran's new security chief warned neighboring countries against joining U.S. economic pressure, while regional governments remain caught between Washington, Tehran, and Israel. The key development is the threat to treat neighbors participating in an economic war as enemies, language that can pressure Gulf states, Jordan, and other partners even without an immediate military move. The Guardian's account gives the warning a named official source, while ABC News and Headlines Australian Broadcasting Corporation highlights Jordan's exposure to crossfire among Iran, the United States, and Israel. That matters because sanctions enforcement, shipping routes, and air defense coordination depend on regional states making choices that Tehran may punish. The story is broader than a single battlefield update. It is about economic coercion becoming part of the security map. Governments in the region will likely avoid commitments until they know whether Washington asks for visible cooperation. Energy traders will watch whether rhetoric threatens ports, tankers, or insurance costs. Diplomats will watch whether Israel, Iran, or U.S. officials lower the temperature or add conditions. AP News ties the warning to wider Mideast developments, which means the next move may be diplomatic rather than kinetic. The next signals are statements from neighboring capitals, sanctions guidance, military alerts, and shipping advisories.